Hi, everyone. I'm Assemblymember Rebecca Bauer-Kahan, and I am so excited to be joined today by Contra Costa County District Attorney Dinah Becton to discuss racial justice and the criminal justice system. Our community has come together in an amazing way over the last few months to look at how we approach racial justice right here in our own community and to have some really important conversations about the future that we want to build together. So I want to thank you for joining me and DA Becton for this conversation today. She is a friend and an amazing woman and leader in our community who has been working on this issue a lot longer than these conversations in the last few months. And so it's really important for us to hear from her and what we're doing at the county level and how we can be her partners in getting to a more just system. So, DA Becton, thanks for being here. It's an honor to be here with you and have this conversation. Will you tell our listeners a little bit about your background and how you've come to this racial justice conversation?
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me say thank you to my Assembly member, Bauer-Kahan. It's an absolute pleasure to join you today for this conversation. Again, a friend and a trusted colleague, and I want to thank you for all that you're doing to lift up the important issues for us here in Contra Costa County. So just a little bit about me. I am the district attorney for Contra Costa County. I was appointed in 2017. Unfortunately, at that time, our district attorney pled to felony charges and resigned, and the Board of Supervisors set out on a search. I was one of 12 candidates under consideration. I was appointed in 2017. And then in the primary election in 2018, I was duly elected by the people. With my appointment, I became the first woman, the first person of color, and the first African American to hold a position of district attorney in Contra Costa County in its 168-year history. So I'm proud to be sitting in this seat and to be a part of the change in criminal justice reform. Prior to becoming district attorney, I served as a judge for 22 years, holding many leadership positions in our judiciary, eventually leading to my election as presiding judge of the Contra Costa County Superior Court. In addition to that, I served as the president for the National Association of Women Judges, the nation's leading voice for women in the judiciary, and then also recently I served as past chair for the State Bar Council on Access and Fairness, which worked on increasing diversity within our judicial ranks and within the entire legal community. So thank you for having me.
No, I'm so excited to have you. And I love your background and the perspectives you bring to this conversation, having been a judge and presiding over a courtroom and trying to give access to justice in that setting, and now as our district attorney. So for people, I often say when people want to, what can they do to impact criminal justice reform? I say, do you understand the importance of our district attorney in that conversation? So can you tell, just for people who don't know as much as we do about the criminal justice system, what is your role in the system as our DA?
You know, a lot of the conversation right now, interestingly enough, focuses on law enforcement, but very seldom is the focus on prosecutors. And I think it is, and I thank you for taking the moment to pause and to think about the role that we play, because it is a very significant one. You know, all the time people, some sort of teasingly, but many people would ask me, wait a minute, you're already a judge, you know, and you're at the height of your career. And why would you leave being a judge to become a prosecutor? But one of the things that happened over time for me, especially as the laws around criminal justice changed, making I guess the best way to say it is we had fewer and fewer places of discretion as sitting judges. And so much of what we were able to do, no matter what we felt the right and fair and just sentence might be, was really controlled by the charge. And that sort of leads us to the prosecutor as being almost really the most important and powerful person in the room. The prosecutor has so many points of discretion and so much power in terms of what happens and how our criminal justice system is shaped. We have the decisions to make about what gets charged, who gets charged. We are recommending sentences. We are at the table plea bargaining. We're reviewing immigration consequences and how that might affect the plea and a person's life going forward. And so it really is that position with that amount of discretion that holds the key in so many ways to criminal justice reform.
I think that's so important for people to understand, because we talk about, in the criminal justice system, prosecutorial discretion all the time, but I don't think it's spoken about in the community and that decision whether or not to charge, right? I mean, that's the first step, and that lies in the hands of your office, and then again, the sentence and everything that follows. So you are an important piece of this conversation. And so given that, and given, I mentioned the conversations that have ensued in the community since the killing of George Floyd and the outrage, and people are really talking about racial justice in new ways. And as you and I think the community knows, these issues aren't new, right? I mean, people were dying in our community before the wave of deaths this spring. But racial justice is now at the top of people's tongues. People are talking about it all the time. I think that's so important and such a positive change. So I wish for you to talk about, what does racial justice mean to you?
Wow. So, you mentioned George Floyd, and unfortunately, and I, along with so many others around the country, was simply heartbroken and horrified to sit and to watch those minutes on TV as we saw a person's life being taken, and that life being taken under the color of law. And not only that, his death, but Breonna Taylor and all of the other names that we've heard over time. And so now we've had people really lift their voices. I mean, literally taking to the streets to demand something different in our criminal justice system. And in my opinion, what that means for us now is that this is an opportunity for us that is, first of all, it is a unique and amazing time in the history of our country. And I know I'm a child of the 50s and the 60s, and I've lived through some major movements in our country, one of them being the civil rights movement, and to watch all of the changes in the law and the changes in our voting rights and everything that has led us to having better voices in our society. But now the focus is squarely on our criminal justice system. And I think it is time for us to step back and to completely reimagine and to transform what criminal justice means to us. I think meaningful reform has to start with acknowledging that we have a system that is wrought with racial and ethnic disparities, especially in our prison systems and in our jails. And we have to demand an end to this thing called mass incarceration. We cannot withdraw or really ignore the fact that we have become the most overly incarcerated country in the entire world. And so it means that all of our decision points have to be reviewed. And especially as prosecutors, we have to look at not only the data, which is something that we have not necessarily been driven by, but to not only take a look at that data and see where we might be causing disparate treatment within our own communities, and then to put in place the policies and the practices that will help us change that tide. So that's what racial justice means to me. It's examining every part of our system, making sure that we do everything that we can to eliminate any instances of racial imbalance and bias within our decision making and within our policies. And making sure that as we're keeping our communities safe, that we are building a system that is fair and is just for everyone in our community.
I love that. And we are so lucky to have you leading the office right now. I mean, I think you're right. All of us that watched the killing of George Floyd, the minutes, it changed us. Yeah. And I think a way that hopefully will change the system moving forward, because it was so horrific. And like you said, all the deaths are horrific. But this was an awakening for many, many people. And mass incarceration is something that you and I have talked about since we got to know each other, and something that I know at the legislature we're really focused on. And I'm so grateful for your partnership. I know I call you all the time to get your thoughts on the bills that are moving through our system and how they impact folks. But it's so critical, because our job is to keep our communities safe. And, the system can change and continue to do that and eliminate this mass incarceration of people of color that we have grown to. And we need to look to systems that are better than ours and how we can do so much better for the people in our community. So can you talk, given that and given sort of everything you want to accomplish, how are you going to use your office to do that? How is the DA's office going to bring more equity into the criminal justice system?
Thank you. That's a great question. And I just want to acknowledge that I appreciate the opportunity for all of the conversations that we have an opportunity to have, especially with some of the important legislation that is at the forefront right now in terms of criminal justice reform. But for me, I've mentioned that we were the most over-incarcerated country in the world, and I just want to put the statistics, before us, because we have 5% of the world's population, and yet we have 25% of the world's prisoners. And so we have more prisoners in our prisons and in our jails than any other country in the entire world. And so that is why I say it's so important for us to commit to ending mass incarceration. Now, as a reform-minded prosecutor, and I do not apologize for that, around the country, there are so many of us now who are in these positions, and there are lots of steps that we have begun to take so that we can try to rectify some of the past wrongs. And I always want to emphasize that with all of these steps, at the forefront of everything that we do has to be community safety. But as we are working to keep our community safe, we want to make sure, as I said before, that we're doing things that will also build in justice and fairness for everyone. One of those things has been just a simple declination of charges. We have taken a look, and similar to other counties, for example, we have come to recognize that the amount of resources that we put, for example, into very, very simple and minor drug possession charges doesn't really keep our community safe. And we have taken the position that those low-level kinds of offenses can best be handled in our healthcare system, because basically when people are addicted to drugs, they're sick and they need help with our healthcare. And so instead of charging those cases as crimes when they initially come into our office, we instead refer them to our healthcare system, and we provide a list of resources to them so that they can get help. So that's one way, and that's a declination of charges, not only with our drug possession charges, but also with other very, very minor crimes that can tend to clog up our system and clog up our resources, both of law enforcement and our office and our courts. Using diversion in a much greater way so that those cases that can safely be diverted, that will allow us to still hold people accountable for the crimes that they may have committed, but to give them an opportunity to make amends to those in our community that may have harmed, but also to understand how they've harmed the community and to have a second chance instead of another criminal conviction on their record. We have also established one of the few conviction integrity units around the country. That trend has come up so that we are able to make sure that we have a unit that is dedicated taking a look at past convictions to make sure that the integrity of those convictions is intact, and to rectify any past wrongs that may have happened. We've also participated in expunging the marijuana convictions, partnering with Code for America. And this is huge because having a conviction on your record means that you're not able to fully participate in our society and to be productive. Having a conviction can prevent one from being able to get a job, to get housing, to get student loans, and everything that will help you be upwardly mobile in our society. And so we partnered with Code for America to use their technology to make our justice system truly work for the people. And so within a matter of seconds, they could go through all of the records that were provided to us by the Department of Justice, and we were able to dismiss over 3,200 convictions for citizens of Contra, Costa County. So that's also work that we're just extremely proud of. And then I am in the forefront of the fight, and I'm not ashamed of it, to end money bail in this country. Money bail doesn't keep our community safe, and it really does have a disparate impact on those so many people who have committed very minor offenses, who may have very, very even low bail amounts, but they can't afford to get out of jail while they're waiting on their cases to be tried. Why? Because even if the bail is $500 for some people, that's impossible. But at the same time, those who have committed serious crimes that pose a threat to the safety of our community, if they have money, they can post bail and they can get out of custody. So I'm all in favor of leaving those decisions, giving the tools to our judges so that they can assess whether a person is at risk of committing another crime, and the judicial officer can assess whether or not this is a person who is at risk of fleeing and failing to return to court, and then making decisions on custody status based on those kinds of assessment tools, as opposed to those that really keep people in jail, not based on those factors. So I think that's a very important part of our work. And then I've also joined with 6 other prosecutors around the country to take a look at sentencing reform and taking a look at some of the old harsh sentences where we might not impose those sentences today, and giving people a second chance in that way as well. So there's a lot of things that are going on right now in the world of criminal justice. Those are a few that we've been able to accomplish, and I certainly hope that we'll have a chance, of course, to talk about our youth justice reform that is on the horizon and at the forefront of our conversations as well.
No, there's a lot going on, and it's interesting to see the way that it all, what you are doing at the local level in the DA's office is really working with us on policy. So I just this morning was talking about a really important measure we're doing that is response to some of what you mentioned, the substance abuse problems that we're not adequately treating in our criminal justice system, but are really a part of why people are being incarcerated. And so we're doing a bill in the legislature to make sure that our healthcare system will cover that, so that when you see those people, they can move into the healthcare system and get the treatment they need, and they're not in the criminal justice system. And so there's so much that we're doing that hopefully will partner with the work you're doing to make this more effective. But I think one of the things that you really touched on is an issue that you talked about, how we have such an over-incarceration problem. We incarcerate more people than any other country in the world. We also have one of the highest, if not the highest, recidivism rate in the world. Is it the highest? I think it's insane. We turn through the system.
Yes, yeah, we do, and that's where the reentry work comes in. Because, we can't just house people in prisons and not expect that they're not going to return to our communities. They will. And so, so much of our emphasis in the criminal justice system has been on punishment, and it hasn't been on equipping people with the tools and the resources that they need when they return home. People have to have housing. Mm-hmm. People have to have job skills, and they have to have jobs to return to. And that's why some of the legislation that has passed in recent years has been so important to people, like ban the box, so that they're not judged on what has happened to them in their past, where they've already, done the time for their convictions, but they have a fair chance at getting a job in our community. And so we have to build a bridge, because people are not going to stay in custody forever, not most, and they will return to our communities. And so we have to be thinking about, what are we supposed to be doing so that that transition is smooth and that people can come home and find a way to be productive members of our society.
And that's community safety, right? People who recidivate are out there committing crimes, right? Yeah. So the more we can provide them with good options that allow them to reenter, the safer our communities are, and the better the outcomes for the individuals who are formerly incarcerated. So it's a win-win-win.
That's another reason why the work that we're doing with restorative justice is also so important. We started it with our youth. We are also going to be moving into neighborhood courts, which will use a restorative justice lens. Again, it is all about, 1, the community safety. We're talking about lower level crimes. 2, holding people accountable for the harm that they've committed. But 3, also helping the entire community to heal, so that we can all move forward in a positive way. So I think those restorative justice tools are going to be a very important tool moving forward as well.
Yeah, we're doing a bill this year that will force the sheriffs to report back on the money that we're sending from the state to counties on anti-recidivism programming in our jails. What are you doing? How are you spending the money? And what is the success rate? Because we need to do better on really replicating the programs that are working and creating better outcomes. And we spend billions of dollars on programs that we have no data to support are working, especially given our high recidivism rates. So we're working with you on this because it's so important. But I do want to turn to the youth in our criminal justice system, such an important part of the conversation. These are kids. These are kids that have obviously made a mistake or done something wrong, but we've always treated them differently. We should, and you are reforming how youth are treated in Contra Costa County. Can you talk more about that?
I'm so excited because again, this is an historic time for us, and we now have opportunity, and I actually say a responsibility to reimagine our justice system as we've been talking about today. But we really have to give our young people a greater chance for success. And so I was very, very pleased to announce within the past week and a half or so that I have established a committee that's going to reestablish youth justice in our community. But even before announcing that, I have been doing work to give our youth a chance. We have never had a countywide youth diversion program, and that's just unfortunate. We had a few jurisdictions that were doing something on their own, but no resources in place so that we could address how to best handle our youth without forcing them into the criminal justice system. So I was very pleased to start it out with just a small conversation with the Richmond Police Department, the Rise Youth Center in the western part of our county, as well as some from our schools, and to begin to think about how we could build a pilot program. But then we suddenly became aware that there was a grant available, and we scurried around. We had about a week's time to put our proposal together, and we were able to get $1 million from the state of California so that we could launch the first juvenile justice restorative justice diversion program for our youth in this county, and we couldn't be more proud. We had some setbacks with COVID-19, but we're using the tools that are available to us electronically. We're taking in our first children as we speak. These are some of our higher level crimes that have victims, and so our youth will get a full assessment. If they've suffered trauma, if there's trauma in their families, whatever has led them to this place of committing crime in our society, one, they will be held accountable, but two, they will get the help that they need so that at the end of the day, they're hopefully not returning to us in that recidivism rate that you talked about. Also, we have a small amount built in as well so that we can have adequate reports on the work that we're doing, and we will be able to come back to you and provide numbers to you to say this is the number of youth that we've served. This is we're not doing something totally new. There are other counties around us who've had very high success rates with this restorative justice method, including Alameda County. So we're just very pleased to be a part of that now. I'm very, very excited for that. But then in addition to that, I've always been very troubled. I have on several occasions as a judge and now in my role as prosecutor visited our institutions where our children are housed. Years ago, for budgetary reasons, primarily the county closed our facility for girls. And people forget about this, but this is another place where we have to remember that we don't have any lower level a place for our girls. Right now, if a judge decides that our girls, even though they may have committed a very, very minor crime, if they need a program, they're going into juvenile hall for that program. That's where our Girls in Motion program is located. So I started looking at that issue and then realizing that youth crime has been on a steady decline over the last 20 years. And it really is getting us to the place where like so many other jurisdictions around our country, it's time to think about moving away from the high penalizing system, institutionalized system that we've used, and using best practices for rehabilitation and community-based reform. So that's what I'm hoping to do. Last year, I was very fortunate to have been appointed by the governor to serve on a committee, a statewide committee that was charged with reimagining our juvenile justice on a statewide level, the DJJ. And so that's what really got me to thinking about this in Contra Costa County, was how could we also begin to have that conversation here? And of course, as we know, the governor is now shifting the function of the state prison system to our local jurisdictions. And that's why I think this is so timely for us now to reimagine and to come up with specific recommendations for what financial investments we need to make. And this is going to be so important because it's going to be bigger than just saying, where do we send kids? Kids have been traumatized. And so we have to have resources for the young people so that they can deal with their issues, but then they have families to go back to. And those families and those communities are going to need resources so that we can all together build up healthier, safer communities. So I'm really excited about this opportunity.
That is so exciting. And one of the things that concerned me when we first had this conversation at the state level about the Department of Juvenile Justice and sort of getting rid of our facilities is, a lot of this is good, but you also can't leave these kids without the services, right? You need to replace them with something that provides them those services that will help them get to a healthier place so they don't end up adults incarcerated in our system because they didn't get the help they needed. And so I'm so happy to hear you guys are doing so much on that front.
If I could just add one more piece of that, because I think what happens is when we begin to talk about a more community-based rehabilitative services, people automatically get alarmed and they think, oh my God, what about people who are youth who've committed really serious crimes like murder and that kind of thing? Well, we have that. And so we have to recognize that community safety always comes first. Community safety comes first. And so we have to look, there are plenty of systems that we can model after. We have to look at, do we need a 200-bed sprawling facility open for 40 to 50 kids, many of whom can be adequately served in our community? How many of those kids are truly dangerous to our society, and where and how should we protect community safety, and at the same time make sure that those kids are in a facility that is healthy and rehabilitative for them as well? We recognize that community safety will not allow every child to be out and about in our community. And so that's an argument that's out there, but I want to make sure to dispel that rumor, because that is not what's being promoted when we talk about reimagining youth justice.
I love that. Well, and I think, I know for me and for you and for many of the people that work in this space, safety is always number one. But I had the privilege of going to Norway and seeing the way they do their criminal justice system. And if you look around the world, other countries are safer than ours and they do things differently. So there is absolute certainty that we can get to a more just system with increased safety, right? And I think that that's what I'm looking to, and I know you are as well.
Yes, thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about policing. I know it's at the top of people's mind. I wanted to talk a lot about what the DA does because I think it's so important. But a lot of people are thinking about how we can reform policing in the moment we're in. And do you have thoughts on that, about use of force and policing and how it needs to change moving forward?
Well, I try not to go too far outside of, the work that I'm doing, but I do think it's important for us to have these conversations in our community, especially as we have so many people calling to defund the police. And it's not a cry that I make, but I do think that there are a number of things that we can do. I started with my own office because, we do have a law enforcement arm. I have roughly 33 uniformed officers that work in the DA's office. The first thing that we did was to make sure that we have taken a look at our policies, our internal policies. We have said that we will no longer allow the use of the cardiac hold because of the safety issues that are surround that, and really just facing the fact that there is nothing about that hold that belongs in 21st century policing. I think we also have to begin to have these discussions about, the thing about law enforcement is that they're there for us when we need them. And there are many times when we have a need to call on law enforcement, and we are appreciative of them and the services that they provide to our community. But because they're there 24/7, we have come to rely on a police response to everything. And that's where I think we have to really begin the discussion about rethinking. What can we do better in response to a family that's in a mental health crisis? Do we need to go out with the force of law enforcement, or are there other opportunities available for us? Are there other kinds of teams that can respond to a family that is in crisis? And can we shift and put some resources into those teams? We've had the MET teams. They're far and few between in Contra, Costa County. MET teams are those teams where we have a mental health professional partnered with someone in law enforcement that can go out and really know how to professionally handle those situations. And so I think that's a very important piece as well, as we continue our efforts towards community policing and having our law enforcement really not only have the de-escalation training, which I think is so important. We've had the recent legislation on the use of force, and I think those policies are very important as well, particularly as we evaluate what happens when there is unfortunately an officer-involved shooting in our communities. And there's another place where I have been working along with some other prosecutors, and that is urging changes in whether or not prosecutors, when they are standing for elections, should be receiving funds and endorsement from unions, from law enforcement unions. And this is not a statement against unions. I think unions have an absolutely important role to play. But I think the public recognizes that as prosecutors, we have to work hand in hand with law enforcement every single day. It's the only way that we can successfully prosecute our cases. And I think that there's a serious issue with respect to public trust and confidence when we are not only charged with the responsibility of working hand in hand with law enforcement, but then at the same time, we're also charged with the responsibility of reviewing what happens when there's an allegation of officer misconduct. And it is that perception of whether we can be fair when people are pouring hundreds of thousands of dollars into our campaigns from a union that is representing those officers, whether we can be fair in our analysis to those situations. So that's why I've also been standing to build better trust and confidence in the decisions that we make if people know that we're not accepting those funds.
I think trust is so important, and I think that's part of what we've lost and we need to get back to. And you hit on an important point about in Contra Costa, where we've had these innovative programs to try to remove some of the pieces where our police are responding that we don't need them to, mental health being one of them, but there's not enough of it. There aren't enough resources. I think the core teams, which are our teams that go out and address homelessness, they're in our community. They tend to know our homeless community because that's their full-time job, has been an amazing model that I think, that's somewhere where maybe you don't always need policing, but having those alternate resources is so critical.
It's critical. And the core team, I want to give thank you for mentioning them. I'm going to give a shout out to the core. They do amazing work. I've actually taken the time, along with Phoenix Johnson, my chief assistant in my office. We have gone out with the core teams, gone onto the freeways, and they know everybody. They know where everyone is. And they take resources and they let everyone know that anytime you're ready to come in for resources, you can call us, we're here for you. And that is just amazing. It's eye-opening to go out with them. I urge anyone who has an interest in that work to try to partner with them. But it is certainly a place that our county could put more resources. I applaud them and the Met teams as well.
Yeah, I agree. So lastly, one of the things that has been so inspiring to me, and I'm sure most of our community the past few months, is our young people and how they have really stepped up to be a part of this conversation, to lead marches across my district and many of the area. And they're getting organized and active. I mean, we have people running for city council across my district because they want to see a more just and transparent government. And some of these people are in their early 20s. It's amazing. It's really a shift. And I know I'm really inspired by all of those folks. So for those of you that are listening, that are newly involved in organizing and being a part of changing your government and being a voice in what you want to see us do, DA, any advice for them on how they can get involved in criminal justice reform and be a part of the change?
I too, I have been so inspired. There was a series, I think it was in the Chronicle, this highlighting some of the young people around our county and around the Bay Area that have been at the forefront of the fight. And I think what's happening here is that everyone, with all that has been happening in our society lately, it's usually young people that are leading the fight. And it's not to say that we're not here, that we are not here to be a resource and to be, kind of advising and pushing any way that we can. But I think our youth have been such an inspiration for all of us, and recognizing that this is not just a moment in time, that this is truly a movement and that it's their time to lead us to the next place of fairness and equity in our communities. And I know that arc of justice, that arc bends towards justice, and they are moving it in that direction. And what I want to say to you is thank you for leading the fight. Thank you for lending your voices to these important issues. Know that we're here, but we're ready to get out of the way and let you be at the forefront of this fight. And thank you for all you're doing.
It's so true. I feel like they're bending that arc with their hands, working so hard. But it really gives me hope that we are moving in the right direction. And it would be so easy right now to feel overwhelmed and frustrated. And you can feel that way with the climate crisis. We've seen youth lead in that space as well. But this generation is not sitting on the sidelines, and I think we would be better for it. So I couldn't agree more. Well, I want to thank you for joining me today. You are an amazing woman and leader and trailblazer, and it's so phenomenal that we have you representing us in the DA's office and leading us to a more just system. We call it the criminal justice system, and there's so much more justice that we need to put into it, as we all know. So thank you for everything you're doing, for stepping up and serving in this role and leading with a strong voice. And I know that I see it every day in our work we do together, but I just want our community to know that you are there providing this kind of leadership, because it really is critical in this moment. So thank you, thank you, thank you. But you heard from both of us that we are here. We are here as a resource. We are here to serve you and to serve our community, to make it safer, make it more just. And I know that both of us believe that those two things can happen hand in hand. So we're committed, and I think I love hearing from all of you on this issue. I've had many calls over the past few months about people who see ways to change this space, ways that maybe I didn't think of, right, as your assembly member. And so continue to be that voice in the community, and we are here to listen to you. So thank you for everyone in 8016, and we are working for you to get to a more just society. And as you heard from the DA, she must be working around the clock with all things she's doing to make our county more just for everybody living in it, and to get us to that place of racial equity. So thank you, DA.
Thank you, Assembly Member.